The Environmental Protection Agency will require refiners to blend more than 19 billion gallons of renewable fuel in 2017, an increase of more than a billion gallons from 2016. Of that, 15 billion gallons will come from conventional renewables, commonly corn-based ethanol. The agency released its Renewable Fuel Standard volumes the day before Thanksgiving. The Energy Independence and Security Act of 2007 initially set a target of 36 billion gallons of renewable fuel by 2022, the final year of the requirement. The goal for conventional biofuel was to hit and stay at 15 billion gallons in 2015, which the EPA has now achieved. Scott Irwin is an ag economist at the University of Illinois who studies the RFS. He joined us Monday to discuss 2017's levels, starting with what they say about the so-called E10 blend wall.
Well, they continue to give a push above that E10 blend wall in the standards, in the sense that those are continuing to be set a bit above the actual physical E10 blend wall.
So does this put more emphasis on higher blends of ethanol like 15, 30, and 85?
At least in theory, it does, but we've actually seen in recent years that those kinds of blends have not been growing very rapidly. They may further down the line, but I wouldn't expect large growth in the next year or two.
So how do they fill that gap in the meantime?
One word: biodiesel. And that's the real story coming out of the latest rulemaking by the EPA, is the big boost this more than likely gives biodiesel.
So why is it so bright for that industry?
Well, because it's an advanced biofuel, which means that it's a basically higher ranked biofuel than corn-based ethanol because it gets a higher score in terms of reducing greenhouse gases. So it can do two things. It can be used to fulfill the advanced component of the standards, as well as the gap between the E10 blend wall and the ethanol mandate itself.
Is the biodiesel industry advanced enough that it can meet the requirements?
Yes, although that answer requires acknowledging the role that imports into the United States have played in the last couple of years. We've seen very heavy imports of both traditional biodiesel and renewable diesel, and those have been important in helping to fulfill that demand for biomass-based diesel, which is the technical name for that category.
I should ask about the long term for renewable fuels with how people are driving and in what cars they're doing it in. What do you think the outlook is with mile per gallon efficiency ratings and total miles that consumers are driving?
Right now, the outlook is basically back to the 1990s is maybe the best way to describe it. We're driving more and buying bigger vehicles, which is good news for particularly ethanol, because that in and of itself pushes out the E10 blend wall.
What do you think the outlook is for renewable fuels and the RFS with a new administration in the White House and a new head of the EPA?
Very interesting questions. A lot of speculation swirling around those issues. On one hand, President-elect Trump has much of his, the fact that he was elected, it's based on his success in Midwestern states where there's a lot of ethanol support. And on the other hand, he's clearly shown an interest in some of the arguments made by those coming out of the oil refining business about some of the perceived problems of the RFS. So it's difficult to know how this is all going to play out. My own personal guess, Jeff, is that you'll see probably a little less aggressive implementation of, in particular, the advanced mandate going forward, but the rest of the RFS is unlikely to be touched, in my opinion.
When we talked a year ago, Scott, you thought that the EPA would go to 15 billion gallons for that conventional fuel mandate. If I were to ask you about years after that, what do you think the forecast looks like?
This one's an easy one, even for an economist with a poor track record like myself on prices and forecasting. In all seriousness, I don't see any reason why it won't stay at 15 billion gallons going forward, because rising gasoline use continues to get closer and closer to that maximum 15 billion gallons.
So that's the floor. Where's the ceiling?
That's the ceiling also.
That's the ceiling.
Because that's the maximum that is in the RFS is 15 billion gallons through 2022. Now, after 2022, the RFS continues, but the standards are then up to the EPA after a comprehensive review. And at that point, anything could happen between a big increase and potentially even a big decrease.
If you're interested in learning more about 2017's levels and the original intent of the RFS, we'll link to more resources on the Market Journal website.